If you've been following the recent news surrounding Bethesda, Microsoft, and the Elder Scrolls Online, then you know it's been a pretty emotional few weeks. The layoffs led a lot of players wondering what would happen next. Was ESO still a priority? Would development slow down? And what about the Elder Scrolls 6? Was this project still on track? Well, today Bethesda gave us one of its biggest official updates since the layoffs. And I think it's worth talking about because there are two announcements that could shape how we look at the future of the Elder Scrolls franchise. One is about the Elder Scrolls 6, the other is about ESO. And while today's news doesn't answer every question, it definitely gives us more clarity than we've had in weeks. Let's get into it. Let's start with the Elder Scrolls 6. In today's studio update, Bethesda confirmed that the Elder Scrolls 6 remains Bethesda Game Studios' primary focus. That by itself is reassuring. Following the layoffs, some players wondered if priorities have shifted or if development might be slowing down. Bethesda addressed that directly. They also included one sentence that immediately caught everyone's attention. They said they're loving how it looks. Now, before anyone starts expecting a trailer tomorrow, let's stay grounded. This isn't a release date. It isn't gameplay. It isn't a launch window. But it is one of the few official comments we've received about the game's development in quite some time. And for long-time Elder Scrolls fans, even that small update is meaningful. It tells us the development is continuing and that Bethesda is confident enough to publicly express excitement about where the game is heading. Now let's talk about the announcement that probably matters most to this community. Bethesda also publicly reaffirmed its commitment to the Elder Scrolls Online. After weeks of speculation following Microsoft's restructurings and layoff, Bethesda made it clear that ESO remains an important part of the Elder Scrolls franchise and that support for the game is continuing. Now, it's important to point out that ESO is developed by ZeniMax Online Studios, while today's statement comes from Bethesda Game Studios. They're different development teams, but they're both part of Bethesda, and seeing Bethesda publicly acknowledge ESO's importance sends a strong message about how they view the franchise as a whole. To me, that's significant, especially after everything that's happened over the last few weeks. What's also interesting is how today's announcement lines up with what we'd already heard from the ESO team. Following the restructuring, the developers explained that plans were changing and that a revised roadmap was being worked on. They also reassured players that development would continue despite the changes. Now, Bethesda is reinforcing that same message from a broader studio perspective. For the first time since the layoffs, we are hearing a consistent message from both Bethesda and the ESO team. The Elder Scrolls remains one of their biggest priorities. ESO continues to be an important part of that future, and development is moving forward. That's much more reassuring picture than what we had just a week ago. There's another part of today's update that I think deserves attention. Bethesda talked about bringing its studios closer together and continuing to invest in the world's players' love for the long term. That doesn't mean that every Elder Scrolls project suddenly shares the same development team. It also doesn't reveal any new plans for ESO. But it does suggest that Bethesda is thinking about its major franchises as long-term investments rather than short-term projects. That's encouraging for fans who worry that the layoffs signal a retreat. Of course, none of this means every concern suddenly disappeared. The layoffs were real. Talented developers did leave. Teams were restructured. Those changes will almost certainly have an impact somewhere. Today's announcement doesn't erase the reality. What it does, it provides context. It tells us Bethesda isn't acting like a company that's walking away from the Elder Scrolls. Quite the opposite. They're publicly reaffirming their commitment to both the Elder Scrolls 6 and the Elder Scrolls Online. Now the focus shifts from words to actions. Over the next 6 to 12 months, players will be watching closely. How do future seasons look? Does the revised roadmap deliver meaningful content? Do class improvements continue? Do we see progress on performance and PvP? Does communication remain open and transparent? Those are the things that rebuild trust. Not statements, not headlines, consistent delivery. So where does this leave us? Today's update doesn't mean it's time for a victory lap. There are still legitimate questions about how the layoffs will affect development in the long run. But compared to where we were just days ago, we now have a much clearer picture. The Elder Scrolls 6 remains Bethesda Game Studios' primary focus. Bethesda says they're loving how it's shaping up. The company has publicly reaffirmed its commitment to the Elder Scrolls Online. And both Bethesda and the ESO team are now delivering the same core message. The Elder Scroll remains one of Bethesda's most important franchises, and ESO is still a key part of that future. That is genuinely encouraging. Now, it's up to Bethesda and ZeniMax Online Studios to turn those worlds into updates that players can see and experience for themselves. What do you think? Did today's announcements make you more optimistic about the future of ESO and the Elder Scrolls 6? Or do you think Bethesda still has to earn back the community trust through future updates? I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments because these discussions always help shape future videos. If you enjoyed this update and want balanced coverage of ESO, Bethesda, MMOs, and the gaming industry, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao!